There's a small moment that happens almost every day, and most people barely notice it. Your phone lights up, a name appears on the screen, and for a brief second, something inside you tightens. You stare at it. You let it ring once, twice, maybe 3 times. Sometimes you silence it. Sometimes you wait for it to stop, and then, a few seconds later, you send a message instead. Hey, can I call you later? Sorry, I'm a bit busy right now. Or simply, what's up? To someone else, it might look like hesitation, or avoidance, or maybe even rudeness. But inside, the feeling is more complicated than that. It isn't that you dislike the person. It isn't that you don't want to talk. It's just that a phone call feels different, unexpected, immediate, a little intrusive. And most people don't really understand that experience. In a culture where constant availability is almost expected, people who avoid phone calls are often labeled quickly. They're called antisocial, awkward, bad at communication, sometimes even lazy. But those labels miss something important. Because this behavior usually isn't about disliking people. It's about how certain minds process interaction. And once you look at it through the lens of psychology and neuroscience, something interesting begins to appear. Avoiding phone calls isn't random. It's a pattern. And like most patterns in human behavior, it usually developed for a reason. For many people, the discomfort begins with something simple: unpredictability. A phone call demands immediate attention. There's no pause, no preparation, no moment to think through what you want to say. Your brain has to switch instantly into social mode. And neurologically, that kind of sudden shift activates the brain's alert systems. Research in cognitive psychology shows unexpected interruptions trigger activity in the brain's threat detection networks, particularly areas like the amygdala and the anterior cingulate cortex. These systems evolved to monitor sudden changes in the environment. Thousands of years ago, a sudden signal meant something might be wrong. Today, a ringing phone can trigger a smaller version of that same reaction. For some people, it barely registers. For others, their nervous system reacts more strongly. Not dramatically, just enough to create tension. Enough to make the brain prefer something more controlled. Texting, for example, offers something phone calls don't: time. Time to process the message. Time to choose words carefully. Time to regulate emotions before responding. For certain personality types, especially those who think deeply before speaking, this space makes communication feel safer. But this preference often has deeper roots. Because our communication patterns rarely start in adulthood. They develop slowly, shaped by early experiences, environments, and the way our nervous system learns to handle social interaction. Some people grew up in households where conversations happened calmly and predictably. Interruptions were rare. Emotional reactions were steady. In those environments, spontaneous communication feels natural. But other people grew up in situations where conversations were more unpredictable. A sudden call might mean someone was upset, or something needed to be fixed immediately, or expectations would appear without warning. Over time, the nervous system learns something subtle. Unexpected contact can mean pressure. Not always, but often enough that the brain begins to anticipate it. So years later, when a phone rings unexpectedly, the body reacts before logic has time to step in. It's not fear exactly. It's more like mental bracing. And the easiest way to avoid that feeling is simple: delay the interaction until you feel ready. This is why many people who avoid phone calls communicate perfectly well in other ways. In fact, they often communicate thoughtfully. They write long messages. They listen carefully. They choose words with care. Their communication isn't weaker, it's just structured differently. And there's another layer people rarely talk about. Phone calls remove a layer of control that many reflective personalities rely on. During a call, responses have to be immediate. Silence becomes noticeable. Words can slip out before they're fully formed. For people who naturally analyze their thoughts before expressing them, that environment can feel uncomfortable. Not because they lack social ability, but because their mind prefers clarity over speed. In behavioral science, this difference is sometimes described as processing style. Some people are fast processors. They think and speak almost simultaneously. Others are reflective processors. Their thoughts organize themselves internally first, and then they speak. Neither style is better. They simply operate at different rhythms. But modern communication often rewards speed, which means reflective communicators can sometimes feel slightly out of sync with expectations. And that mismatch can slowly create a quiet habit, avoiding situations where instant responses are required. Phone calls happen to be one of those situations. But like most psychological patterns, there's a paradox hidden inside it. The same trait that makes someone hesitant to answer calls often gives them a different strength. They tend to be observant. Because they spend more time processing information internally, they often notice emotional nuances that others miss. They reflect before reacting. They replay conversations. They analyze tone, meaning, context. This depth of processing can make them thoughtful listeners and careful communicators. But it also comes with a quiet cost. Because when society misunderstands this pattern, people sometimes begin to question themselves. They wonder why something that feels natural to them seems effortless for others. They might assume something is wrong with them. But the truth is simpler than that. Human nervous systems are incredibly diverse. Some people feel energized by spontaneous conversation. Their brains enjoy the rapid exchange of ideas, the unpredictability, the flow. Others feel more comfortable when interaction has a little space around it. A moment to think, a moment to breathe, a moment to organize what they want to say. Neither style is superior. They're just different forms of social rhythm. And when someone consistently avoids phone calls, it often isn't because they don't value connection. It's because their mind connects more comfortably in environments that allow reflection. Given the choice, they'll often still reach out. They'll send messages. They'll respond thoughtfully. They'll maintain relationships in ways that feel steady rather than sudden. From the outside, it might look like distance. From the inside, it's often simply a different pace. And once you see it that way, the behavior stops looking like avoidance. It starts looking like adaptation. A small adjustment the mind made over time, shaped by personality, experience, and the quiet preferences of the nervous system. Which means something important. If you've ever watched your phone ring, if you've ever waited for it to stop, if you've ever felt that brief moment of hesitation before responding, there's a good chance your mind isn't broken. It's just operating on a slightly different rhythm than the one the world tends to expect. And there's a lot more hidden in those quiet rhythms than most people realize. Because the way people handle communication often reveals something deeper about how their mind processes the world. And once you begin noticing those patterns, you start seeing them everywhere.